We really try to build our podcast and lead with, the values that are important to us and things that are important to us and the way we feel things, the way we want to do things. And we have seen that has drawn a certain incredible group of people to be in our community. And so I think we've done that right, I guess, in a lot of ways. We may not have grown as fast as we could, but the people that we've gathered and brought together are such an incredible group of people that I feel like I wouldn't change that even if we could have had more downloads or could have grown. I feel like we've done it true to ourselves, and that's the most important thing to me. Welcome to Normalizing Non-Monogamy, the podcast where we interview incredible people from across the entire spectrum of non-monogamy to hear their fascinating stories. We strive to bring guests on the show who have a healthy approach to non-monogamy. However, it's important to remember that everyone does it a little bit differently, and the views and opinions expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect our own.
Additionally, we produce this show for entertainment purposes only. Please be aware that we aren't doctors or therapists. Consult a medical professional for anything regarding your health that you might learn about on the show. Enjoy!
Well, welcome to Focus Fridays, Season 2, Episode 9. We're Finn and Emma, and today we have a super fun conversation for you. We are going to be talking with Pat. We met Pat at the World Domination Summit, which if you listen for a while, you've heard us talk about it, but the World Domination Summit was a conference that we went to in June, and we met Pat there. The conference is full of amazing people doing incredible non-traditional things, I'd say.
Taking over the world.
Yeah.
But in a positive way.
It was just a collection of really just a lot of amazing ideas. And we loved meeting Pat. And Pat has a podcast called Podcast Growth Hacks. And he interviewed us for his show. And he's kind enough to let us release this episode on our podcast as well.
Yeah, this is exactly as it was recorded for his show, and this came out a few months ago. So perhaps you've already listened to it. Also, if you're a premium subscriber, you may have listened to this when you signed up because we released it early for you as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, as Emma said, Pat interviews us to talk about basically how we built our podcast from the ground up. And so it's a really fun conversation.
All the behind the scenes information about N&M headquarters over here, Normalizing Non-Monogamy headquarters.
That's what it is. And that's what the conversation is. So again, a little bit more about Pat. Pat is the host of Podcast Growth Hacks. He's also the CEO and founder of a company called Pod Inbox, which actually Pod Inbox is the service we use so you can send us voicemails. So if you want to send us a voicemail, you would be using Pat's software, supporting Pat's work, and sending us voicemails, which is super cool. He's also just a serial tech entrepreneur. He was born in Hong Kong, grew up in Southern California, went to UC Berkeley, and now lives in Portland, Oregon. Still learning how to say all the 50 states. There's some tough ones.
There are some tough ones. I don't know if Oregon's the toughest one, but...
What's the toughest one?
Let's not go down there right now.
Anyway, I read that off of Pat's website. So, yes.
I just didn't want him to go down that debate.
I understand. I totally understand. It's Ohio.
Yeah, Ohio's the hardest one for sure.
Anyway, so the point is, go check out Pat's work. It's a great podcast. His website and Pod Inbox is amazing. Use the service, send us a voicemail, send us an email. We would love to hear from you. And now for anybody who is a premium subscriber, we're going to jump right into the interview of us. And for anybody else, well, you get to learn what the premium subscription is. Again, you'll get to stop learning about it as soon as you sign up.
That's true. But the premium subscription is, you guessed it, a way to skip these ads or announcements up front. And it also is a great way to support the show. So, don't worry, though. We are including the community announcements briefly at the end of each episode, so you still get the most important things.
Yeah, so to sign up for the premium subscription, it's actually you pick the price. It's cheap as $2 a year if you want. And we would love to have you join us there. To sign up, it's right on our homepage or in the show notes of every single episode in the last couple of weeks, or in your podcast player show notes. There's a link there as well.
Next up, we have a virtual meet and greet coming up this coming Tuesday. That is September 27th. We're super excited about this virtual meet and greet. We'd love to have you join us. These are great opportunities to meet like-minded people in a really just a casual, fun way.
And build community.
Mm-hmm.
However, maybe you're looking for, well, hold on.
To sign up, go to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com, and click on the meet and greet tab.
It's actually, I think it says events now.
Oh, you're right.
It changes like every week.
You can still just find it on our website. It won't be that hard, I promise.
Or there's links in the podcast player show notes or in the show notes on our website.
And just a quick reminder, these are open to anyone. You just must be respectful and open-minded. And the price is pay what you want.
And if you're looking for more ongoing community, well, we'd highly recommend you check out our Patreon community, which we're not going to talk about because we talk about it during the interview. And we're going to have one of our amazing community members share their experience for the next 37 seconds, and we'll see you on the other side of that.
I love being part of the Normalizing Non-Monogamy community, specifically the MeWe chat groups. Everyone is very supportive and respectful, and it really is a non-judgmental, safe, fun space. It's been helpful for me to hear other people's perspectives on different things that I might be going through, to get their support, or to just learn how others are doing non-monogamy. I joined a couple years ago looking for community, and I definitely feel like I've gotten it. So thank you, Emma and Finn, for bringing together such a cool, awesome, unique group of people.
Thank you so much for being a part of the community for the last few years. We've loved getting to know you, and thank you for sending us this testimonial as well.
Yeah, a huge thank you. And if you're interested now in joining us in being awesome like this person, head over to our website. Again, there's a Patreon tab. You can click on that in your show notes, all the places. Basically, go to our website and you'll find anything and everything.
So including, the last thing we want to mention is you can order your very own Give Love shirt or sweatshirt.
Yeah. So the shirts are amazing. If you want to see what they look like, well, you know where the website is.
Yes, normalizingnonmonogamy.com.
And while you're there, send us an email, send us a voicemail using Pod Inbox, and we would love to hear from you. And with that, let's head over and hear us on somebody else's podcast.
Let's go.
I will say the other thing we do is we do a monthly virtual meet and greet.
Yeah.
And what we do with those is we used to charge $10, and now we say it's a pay what feels good. And we've actually found that we make a little bit more by taking away the requirement to pay, because some people will pay $0, but some people will pay $20 or $30 instead of $10.
Hello, you're listening to Podcast Growth Hacks, where I talk to podcasters of all experience levels to unpack the most powerful growth tactics they used to grow their podcast. I'm Pat Chung. And if you're a podcaster, well then subscribe so that together we can all learn and experiment with how to grow our own podcasts. Today we're chatting with Emma and Finn, the hosts of Normalizing Non-Monogamy podcast. They've been doing this podcast since April 2018 with over 272 episodes under their belt and around 2,500 followers on both Instagram and Twitter. They both had corporate engineering jobs, but after feeling uninspired by their 9-to-5, they both quit their jobs, bought a one-way ticket to South America, and started pursuing what they're currently doing today, which we'll dive into in this episode. Welcome to the show, Emma and Finn. How are you doing?
We're doing great. Thanks, Pat, for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're excited to be here.
Well, thanks for being here. Today, we have you on the show to learn about your experience growing your podcast and especially growing your Patreon community to over 200 members, which is pretty amazing. But before we dive into all that, let's get to know a little bit more about you and your podcast. So yeah, tell us a bit about your podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead, Emma.
You want me to start? Oh, well, about our podcast. So as you mentioned, we started our podcast in the spring of 2018. It was right before we left and traveled South America for a year. And so we were looking to do something different than our corporate engineering jobs and just change our lives completely. And our podcast is a weekly interview podcast. So we interview people who are exploring non-monogamy that can look a lot of different ways. And it could be somebody by themselves. It can be with a couple. It can be with a triad, or we even had quads on the podcast as well. And so it's just a weekly interview podcast that we have a lot of fun with. And we talk to a lot of amazing, amazing people.
Yeah. The only thing I'll maybe add to that is sort of like the inspiration of like why we decided to start it was back in 2018, when we started this, there were quite a few different podcasts that talked about non-monogamy, but a lot of them were from a first person perspective. And it was usually, and this is not all, but usually it was a couple talking about like their journey into it and, you know, how that looked, how it evolved. And we would often like listen to the first couple episodes, and then we'd like get to know who the people were. And then we'd get a little bored, not because the people were boring, but because the stuff that then like usually comes after that are things that we've experienced a lot of ourselves. So maybe like going to parties or going on a vacation or different things that we really loved meeting the new people. And we've always loved that aspect of non-monogamy ourselves. And so we're like, I kept telling Emma, I'm like, why is there not a podcast where every week it's just somebody different? We learn about them and then somebody brand new the next week. So I guess that's my
That's why we created it.
Maybe that's why non-monogamy draws me in, is that I'm always wanting to meet new people. So yeah, that was where it came from, and it kind of took off, and here we are 4 years later doing it. So
it sounds like the interview aspect of it is unique in the niche.
A bit,
yes. Well, I feel like non-monogamy is a niche in itself, right? And then the interview aspect is another niche there.
Yeah, there are quite a few podcasts in this sort of realm that they'll often interview like therapists or experts, researchers, and we do have them on our show as well. But we often take a little bit of a different approach when we interview them. It's usually, hey, yeah, well, we want to hear about your research, but we really want to hear your personal story. Like why did you do the research? Why are you a therapist who works with non-monogamous couples? And often it's born out of some personal journey that's really interesting and really makes it more relatable in a lot of ways. So yeah, interviews are not uncommon, but the way we approach it is a bit uncommon, and that's kind of fun.
Yeah, out of curiosity, how do you find your guests? Because like even me, as I'm kind of diving into this world of interview podcasts, it's fairly easy for me, right? Yeah. Everyone kind of publicizes that they're a podcaster. I could kind of reach out to them because they're already experienced with being on the mic. Pretty easy for me to get interview guests. But
yeah.
Non-monogamous, practicing
Well, we started with reaching out to friends. And so we had a pretty vast friend network that we just put a plea out to anyone to please come on the podcast so we get it started. And also we started reaching out to other podcasters and other content creators in the space. And so early on, for our first, maybe 20 episodes, we would go back and forth between either a friend of ours or a content creator. We kind of went back and forth until we got enough momentum where people started reaching out to us. And over the since probably episode 25, it's been almost all people reaching out to us.
Right. That's interesting. And when you first started it, I noticed both of you go by pseudonyms. Edmund Finn, they're not really your real names. And even when I look at your website, I think it's like more depictions of you versus real pictures. So when you're interviewing real people, kind of sharing what their identities are, is it weird at all that you're under a pseudonym?
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, yeah, go ahead. I think it is. And it's something that we actually have a bit of conflict in internally for each of us of we're trying to normalize something that we are not quite fully out about ourselves. And so there is a bit of like I said, internal conflict about that. We have
and some shame.
And yeah, definitely some shame in there. Over the last year or two, we've done a lot of work in coming out and sharing with our family and friends a lot more.
Stop you real quick because I want you to continue. But first off, the reason why we used pseudonyms in the beginning was to protect our privacy. We just wanted a layer of privacy and anonymity moving forward. And so, and a lot of our family and friends didn't know about our non-monogamous life and about that part of our relationship. And so we wanted to just have some privacy. And I think now I'm going to continue. We've been working over the last couple of years to tell more people, to come out to more people. We still like using the pseudonyms. I mean, because we've been using the pseudonyms for 4 years now. Everyone knows us as Emma and Finn. We like that level of privacy, but we're working to be more and more open about who we are.
Does that make marketing the podcast a little hard? Because everyone always teaches, you got to be yourself. You got to put yourself out there. With your podcast, this layer of anonymity kind of bucks that trend of the marketing trend of leveraging your own networks first. And yeah, has that helped or hurt you, or what did you learn from that?
My opinion is it has hurt us.
Yeah,
in a lot of ways. So you threw out our less than impressive social media numbers. So I thought those were good, by the way. Well, when you've been doing it for 4 years, and you for 3.5 out of the 4 years, you posted like once a month on Instagram, and we posted on Twitter a lot in the early days, and probably about 2.5 years ago or so, we basically just were like, Twitter. We did not enjoy it, and so we stopped doing it. So the 2,500 followers you see there was probably 2,400 2.5 years ago. It has not changed. But you're actually right. Like, not being able to, there's sort of this saying, I would say, of like, document your journey, don't create content. And so it's much easier if you can jump on a TikTok and talk to your fans or talk to your audience about what you're going through and just being yourself. I think there's a ton of power in that. Same thing with Instagram, being able to jump on and do a live story or just do a spur of the moment Q&A. And we've sort of limited ourselves in that capacity for the time being. And I do think it has probably hurt our numbers. So has being very horrible at posting on Instagram. So yes, you're
right.
correct.
Right. Being anonymous, having that anonymity layer definitely, limits some of these trends that you could take advantage of, like being on these lives, being on these reels.
Yep.
But you make an interesting case study for me because you literally had to grow everything from zero. Your podcast, your Instagram, your Twitter. That's why I think those are impressive numbers. Because, let me ask about your personal Twitter and Instagram. Did you have a lot of followers there?
I don't even have a personal Instagram or Twitter.
Okay, so it's not like there was...
I do, but there's not a lot on there.
Okay, so maybe it didn't hurt you on some level because you had to start from zero anyway.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Let's rewind back to the beginning. So on the bio on your website, it said you quit your job. I take it it's a decently paying corporate job in the tech industry. Did you have any other podcasting experience to begin with, or did you just start this one from scratch?
Yeah, our backgrounds are both engineering. I don't know how you define well-paying. I will say neither of us ever made six figures. What we did is we actually dove pretty hard into now we're going on a different path, but FIRE, which is financial independence, retiring early. So down the personal finance rabbit hole for many years. And so we were making an okay living, both of us, but we were saving north of about 70% of our income. So we lived in a cheap apartment. We did everything as cheap as we could. We sold down to one car that was a car that was given to Emma when she was 16 by her grandma to drive her around. And we drove it for 15 years. So we cut all the costs we could because we wanted to be able to go and live our lives and travel and explore. So we had no podcasting background. And actually, what's funny about it is
I had no interview background.
No. But for me, listening to a voicemail I would leave on somebody's phone, I couldn't do it. And it was so I hate hearing my own voice. I've now edited 300 plus hours of my own voice. So I've gotten a little more tolerant of it. But yeah, we had no background in it.
Yeah. But we also, when we went to travel, we wanted to start this podcast. We also were trying to figure out, it was a very transitional time in our lives, obviously. And we were trying to figure out what else we were doing. So this was a piece of that puzzle, but there were a lot bigger things going on for us as well. Okay, we're going to go travel for a year. Then we're going to, when we came back to the States, we've had a number of different random jobs over the last handful of years, but we've always continued doing the podcast and trying to keep growing it. But it has been fairly slow growth.
Super impressed. So many risks you guys took, obviously, quitting some kind of paying job, to travel to a different country, starting a new thing. Was the intention to start a podcast and to have that as some source of income at all, or?
I think we have different opinions on this. I will say for me, it was always in the back of my head. Like I have a really hard time half-assing things. So if I'm going to build something, like to me, I'm going to build it as big and as amazing as I can. And so for me, it was always like, I would love this to be a full-time thing that reaches millions of people and changes the world. Like that's like my ceiling when I start something. And so for me, that was always my drive, but I don't know that we completely aligned on that out of the gate.
Well, I don't think out of the gate. No, I think it was something that I saw potential in, but I was also trying to figure out for myself what that meant. Did I want to go all in on this podcast and not just be our focus and my focus? Did I want to do other things? And so I know that has created the differences in our approaches to this has definitely created struggle for the two of us in our relationship as we've approached this project. And that's going down a whole nother rabbit hole that we don't need to necessarily go down. But we definitely approached it differently in the beginning and at different times throughout the last 4 years as well.
Right. So I'm assuming we're going to dive into where you are at monetizing it and how long it took and all that. But I assume in the beginning, you didn't monetize it from the beginning. So when you quit your job, and I love the FIRE community, the Financial Independence Retire Early community, super cool take on income and how to make things work. So did you have a lot of odd jobs to sustain your travels and all that?
Yeah. So it's been a challenge. And since we quit our jobs, so maybe just touching really quick on the early monetization of the podcast, we promoted some like affiliate partners. They were like different dating websites and a couple of other things. But when you're tiny, and I will say even now being where we're at, monetizing a podcast can be pretty challenging, especially in the niche that we're in. We can come back to that. But in terms of like odd jobs, when we were traveling in South America, it was primarily like volunteer work and just trying to enjoy that time.
We were mostly living on our savings.
Yeah. And when we came back, it was a few odd jobs here and there. I worked at a startup for about a year, and Emma worked a couple of jobs here and there. And we've been doing some contract work.
We still both do contract work.
It's a lot of like trying to piece together enough money to live on, and figuring out what that looks like month to month is a bit scary sometimes.
Right. So where is the podcast now? Does that account for a decent amount of the income you have?
A chunk of it, not enough to.
Well, it accounts for most of it, but it's still not enough to live on.
Right.
So we're reassessing, I'm going to have to go and get another job. Emma's going back to grad school. And so we can't afford to live in San Francisco on podcast makes at this point.
That's cool. No, I love it. So it's still part of the journey of how to monetize it such that it could maybe be a primary source of income later. That totally makes sense. Well, let's dive into some of the things you did to grow your show and to grow this, what I think is a very impressive Patreon audience. So maybe let's start with the Patreon. How many members do you have as part of your Patreon membership now?
Just over 200.
Yeah, I think as of this morning, it was like 220.
Yeah. And we started the Patreon, I believe, in July of 2019. It was almost a little over a year after we started the podcast. So we decided we didn't want to start a Patreon right away. Just the way we were approaching it was we wanted a lot of content before we were asking people to come support us. We just wanted to approach it that way. So that's what we did. We started it a year after, and it has slowly grown. But what's really amazing is that it's really a big community and the people are involved. And so there's 220 people. I would say a vast majority of them are very involved in the community as it is, which is, I feel like, another level of, it impresses me that people are so dedicated.
Well, and so what involved looks like for the community is we have like a chat platform. We use MeWe, it's like a social media network that you can make private. So there's people in there all day long, hey, I'm struggling with this, or hey, this was amazing. And then people jumping in and saying, oh, it's just a big support network. And these people have turned into like some of our closest friends, some of their closest friends are in the community. They'll travel across the country to have little meetups together.
We also do monthly video Q&As with whoever wants to join. And those are pretty well attended and great conversations. And then we do a men's group call and a women's group call. We have those groups as well. And so we put a lot of energy into the community.
Yeah, let's break down what members get a little bit. For those not familiar with Patreon, it's just a platform for any kind of creator actually to create a monthly subscription, I guess what they call perks. And from what I heard from a lot of podcasters, a lot of people think about it, but then they usually get stuck on what kind of perks to offer, because it's usually some tiers based off of the subscription fee, right?
Yep.
Tell us about your perks a little bit in these tiers.
Yeah. Sure. So the first tier is like $2. And what's that? $2 a month. Yep. And what you get there is you basically get to be part of the monthly Q&As if you would like. And so those usually have 15 to 20 people on them. We do them one for the East Coast time zone and one for the West Coast time zone, usually on the same night.
You do those Q&As in that chat that you described?
We do them on Zoom.
They're Zoom calls.
Yeah,
Zoom calls. Okay.
Yep. And then at the $5 level, it's pretty much, you get everything from $5. So you get the men's group. So there's a private chat room for the men's group. And we have non-binary people in there, and we've had trans folks in there as well.
And the women's group.
And you get the women's group, and you also get the monthly calls, and you get to be in the chat platform with everybody, where there's just sort of like ongoing support and community. So those are pretty much like, I would say those are the bulk of the perks at every level. We made a $10 level, which what we've told people is when they sign up, they kind of tell us where they're at. And if we happen to be in their area, we'll do our best to like buy them a beer, buy them a drink, maybe get together a small group of other people who are in that town and try to grab a drink with them. And then we've had over the last 3 years, people telling us like, you're way undercharging for this. We're part of other communities like it. You should be charging more. And we've gone back and forth about what to do with that, because a big part of the reason that we feel our community is as special as it is because we're not pricing people out necessarily. It's at a level where most people could afford it. And that brings a different diversity. So what we did is we went just like a couple months ago and we added like a $15, $20, $25, $50, and $100 level that nobody's ever subscribed to, but it's there. And what we did is we just said like, hey, these are placeholders. If you want to, you can support at a higher level. You don't have to. You're not going to lose anything. We're not going to just take away the $5 level and make it a $20 level. But people have been asking for this. So here's your opportunity. If you would like to support with a higher pledge, great. And if we can add stuff in the future, like if we start to make enough money where we can send people a t-shirt or something, then we would love to add those. But it was sort of just an open-ended, like, you can contribute what you want, but we're not going to like take away anything from the $5 level.
What's the most successful tiers?
$5.
$5.
Oh, $5. And do you feel like you ever leave any money on the table for people who just want to donate like a flat donation? Versus, because Patreon kind of makes you do monthly, right? I've always been a little bit skeptical of that. But yeah, how has that worked or maybe hasn't worked for you?
I'd say like in general, people can subscribe for like a month or two, and that's more of and then like stop it. So that would be kind of more of a one-time.
Yeah, and they can pay for a year. It lets you do a year and you get a little discount. I know some people put on like their website, like, buy us a coffee or here's our Venmo. We've tinkered with that a little. We haven't done a ton with it. I will say the other thing we do is we do a monthly virtual meet and greet.
Yeah.
And what we do with those is we used to charge $10 and now we say it's a pay what feels good. And we've actually found that we make a little bit more by taking away the requirement to pay, because some people will pay $0. But some people will pay $20 or $30 instead of the $10. And so we get together the way the virtual meet and greets work, they're not part of the Patreon community. They're open to anybody.
Oh,
And we just bring people into Zoom. We usually have like 30 to 40 people, and we'll do like some opening icebreaker questions. We'll go over some ground rules, and then we use the breakout room feature, and we'll ask like a leading question to start a conversation. We'll send people into a room with like 5 or 10 people, usually five people. They'll talk about it for like 8 to 10 minutes. We'll bring them back, scramble the rooms, ask a new question, and send them away. And that's a way for people, they could sign up and pay $100 if they wanted. And they would then get the sort of the activity out of it. So
yeah, I love the pay what you want model. How do you logistically handle that? Do they pay after, and what platform do you use?
Yeah, great question. So we built our website on Wix, and there is a Wix plugin for a form builder that lets you like collect people's information usually. And we do like your name, your email. Have you ever done this before? A couple of like check boxes that
the consent forms and stuff.
Yeah, some consent. Some if I'm a jerk, I'm going to get removed and never let back in. Okay. And then it lets people pay. And one of the options is like let people pick what they pay. And so we just check that box, and
they pay through Stripe.
Yep, and it connects through Stripe. And
I see, and that's before the event.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's cool. I love that model, pay what you want too, because then it's almost like a lead capture. Even if they pay $0, you could.
Yes.
Do you ever kind of remarket to them?
We do, and we get a lot of people who come. It's kind of it's a great lead generator. Is usually our virtual meet and greets have about half people who are part of our Patreon community and half people who aren't. And at the end, we usually say like, hey, if you've loved being here, like look around, hey, throw your hand up if you're part of the Patreon community. And like, these are the type of people you'll get to spend your time with every day if you're in the Patreon community. And we usually have a little influx of people joining the Patreon community because they've usually come and joined a meet and greet either for free or for a couple of bucks.
Right. So even your Patreon community members who are already paying, they might actually pay again.
Yep.
Oh yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, that's a great way to get more.
Yeah.
Because they always say try to sell some upsells. That sounds like a great upsell.
Yeah. We've also tried to do some in-person events. We've used the same model of pay what you want. And these have been just really informal meet and greets. Let's just get together somewhere and just chat. And we actually did a picnic once too. We've done a handful of them. They're great. We love them, but they're not a great source of income because by the time we pay for our expenses, like we're not making enough right now. We don't have a big enough draw yet to bring enough people we might bring 20 or 30 people. It may not be enough to cover our finances, our expenses, but we still love to do them and we'll keep doing them, but it's not, the virtual meet and greets definitely tend to be more where we're able to recoup some of the costs.
Okay. That's cool. I'm curious, for your Patreon supporters, do you think they're mainly supporting for these perks, or do you think they're just trying to support the show in some way?
I think some of both.
Yeah, there's some that I think they're like, hey, I just wanted to give back. I've been listening to you for 3 years and I decided to finally do it. I will say there's quite a few that they've said that this community or the men's group call is one of the best things in their life, and they don't know what they would do without it. So for some of these people, we could probably charge $200 a month and they would be there. But the reason I think it is what it is because we charge $5 a month.
Right. So I imagine there's some percentage of members that maybe don't even log into a Zoom call. They just kind of keep paying. And then a lot are very active members that they come every week or every month or however often you have these, right?
Yeah, the Zoom calls usually have 15 or so people on them for the main one, but then we record the audio for those and we'll post it so people who couldn't make it can still sort of get out of the conversation whatever everybody else did as well.
Oh, that's really cool. You record the conversation and then you have like a private part of the site where you host these files. I see.
Yeah,
that's very cool. Going back to when you first began, it sounds like you started the Patreon community a year after the podcast, which seems like a pretty reasonable amount and pretty short, actually. Was there ever any imposter syndrome or anything around like how many listeners you need before you start that? Because I think that's where a lot of podcasters get a little bit tripped up is like, they might have 100 listeners. Is that too little? Like, do you remember how many listeners you had before you started your Patreon?
I don't.
Yeah, I don't even remember. And I'm sure there is. I think it's also probably depends on what your perks are, right? Like if the perk is like, hey, we're going to send you a cool bumper sticker, you probably only need 5 listeners and you just need one of them who wants a cool bumper sticker. I think it's so podcasting, like, numbers are so hard to really aggregate and know what you're doing. And the easiest correlation would be YouTube, right? Like if you go onto YouTube and you have a YouTube channel, you can know like this video has been watched 1,173 times. And you know that exactly because everything happens on YouTube. But with a podcast, there's probably 200 different podcast apps and 200 different ways people can listen to you. And so capturing every one of those downloads and knowing that it's just...
Well, and it's a download versus a listen too. There's stuff like people
hard.
downloading it that you don't actually know if they listened or not.
But to answer your question, yes, there was a lot of imposter syndrome, like we're too early, no one's going to want this. And it was slow. And I think that's the thing you have to be okay with early on in all of this is like your first 20 episodes, you still might only get like 10 downloads. But if you're building something that you love, if you're enjoying it, really you're building it for yourself and you hope other people are going to get something out of it. And so I think my advice would be don't build something you don't enjoy doing, because if all you're doing is looking at your statistics and hoping they're going up, you're going to drive yourself cuckoo. Speaking from experience.
Yeah. So how did it feel when you first got let's say your first 5 Patreon members? What did you like? How did those Zoom calls look like, and how long did it take to get?
Well, we were so excited. I remember the first Q&As, there were only a couple people on them, and it was like, oh, there's people here. And some of them, if I remember right, were our friends. So I thought we felt like maybe we were cheating a little bit. But when it started growing, which took trying to remember, because COVID impacted this too. This is like another piece to think through, because we had started the Patreon in like summer of 2019, and it was really slow to grow. Only, a couple people a month would join. And then in 2020, people started looking for online communities because they had to. And so that started growing still slowly, but it helped. It helped increase our Patreon, I think, a little faster, but it definitely cut the listeners down, way down.
Yeah.
And so that was just that definitely impacted things in the last 4 years for sure.
Yeah, that's an interesting correlation. I hadn't even thought of. Like our numbers overnight got chopped in half. Like our downloads went from, I think we were at about 5,000 an episode when it first came out, just cut in half right overnight when COVID hit. But at the same
5,000 downloads per episode
within the first month, roughly.
Yeah, that's really good.
And so we saw those numbers literally overnight went from 5,000 to like 2,000. But at the same time, we saw our Patreon community shooting up because everyone was now like, I'm stuck at home. What am I going to do? I need to talk to people. And they started seeking out virtual community. And we did one other thing that I think was pretty awesome. And I'll pat ourselves on the back for this. Early on in the pandemic, I think in like April of 2020, we suspended billing on our Patreon community for about 3 or 4 months. And we didn't turn it back on until we pulled the community and asked them like, hey, do we need to keep this off for another month or should we turn it back on? And everybody was like, please turn it back on. We want to pay you for this service. We might have lost a couple people when we did, but what we wanted to make sure was that people who were getting like lost their jobs and incomes and all of these things that were impacted, that they didn't then have to like give up their only source of community at the same time. And so we suspended billing and we didn't really lose anybody through the pandemic. And we grew pretty significantly through the pandemic.
Yeah, that's very thoughtful. And now, as we're coming out of the pandemic, how's that affecting your numbers? Are you still growing at a good rate?
Our Patreon, I think it's maybe slower growth a little bit.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
still
people
growing, but
Yeah.
It's a little slower.
Especially in the summer, people like to get out. And so we'll see fewer people on calls. People are just not quite as engaged in the summer, but then winter comes around and people are back inside and it's very cyclical. It's an interesting thing.
Now, looking back across your Patreon journey, was there anything that you did that just kind of helped grow it exponentially, or was it always kind of a slow, gradual growth?
There's a couple times we've been on other podcasts and we've seen spikes from those. And so if we are on another podcast and that there's a lot of talk about Patreon or community, or they have a large audience, then we'll usually see a small spike from that in our Patreon community. Other than that, no, it's been pretty, that I can think of right now. It's been pretty just, natural growth.
Yeah.
And how do you market your Patreon? Is it mainly through the podcast or through social? Where are people mainly coming from? Is your lead funnel kind of like social media going to your podcast, then going to your Patreon, or just all channels floating into your Patreon?
I would say the only place we really talk about Patreon is on the podcast. And there's a couple of pages on our website. And if we're on another podcast, we'll talk about it. But we don't really post an Instagram graphic that drives people to it.
Not very often.
I'm not saying it wouldn't work.
I was like, maybe we should change that.
Yeah. It's just we like to talk at people, and we've started having people send us voice testimonials that we can use at the intro to first person perspective.
It feels more personal.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I asked that question because I feel like a lot of times podcasters are confused. What's their main channel of communication and marketing? And I love that it sounds like it's your podcast that's really the place where you're building trust. And then after they trust you, that's where you're kind of driving them to something else that's maybe a little bit more paid. So that makes a lot of sense to me. So yeah, how are your numbers now in terms of your podcast download numbers?
Yeah, right now, roughly in the first 30 days or the first month, which is one of the metrics, if you were going to start trying to advertise on your podcast and reach out to advertisers, they'll pay you in something like $1 per mil. Mm-hmm. And a mil is 1,000 downloads. And so they'll look at you and say, how many downloads in the first month does an episode usually get? Right. And so right now we're roughly around 5,000. So we're sort of back to pre-pandemic numbers at this point, and it's sort of been a crawl back there, and it's actually been hanging out there for probably about 6 or 7 months.
And are you finding your own sponsors, and what CPMs are you getting?
We actually don't have any official sponsors. We have a couple of affiliate partners that we use.
Oh, okay.
The nice thing about that we like is we can say whatever we want about them. We don't have to read anything. It could be 10 seconds or it could be a 10-minute diatribe.
We did try sponsors before and they didn't work so well for us. We just didn't, there's multiple reasons I don't need to go into now, but we just decided the affiliates right now worked better for us.
Yeah.
Okay. I remember hearing, I listened to a couple of your episodes and there's I think an STI. So that's an affiliate. That wasn't a sponsor.
Correct.
Yeah. That's our favorite one because it's odd. It helps people and the payout is pretty awesome from it. So yeah, we love that. It's an online STI testing service. I mean, you go in person to give blood and everything, but everything else is pretty seamless and anonymous, and it's great. Yeah.
Have you ever considered reaching out to them and asking them to be a sponsor?
Yeah.
Yes, we have, and they are challenging to work with.
Yeah.
We just get our check from them every month and try not to rock the boat too much. So yeah, but it's a great company. I don't think podcast advertising is their biggest ROI. So I don't know that they really assign anybody to it. I think it's probably
not up there on a high priority.
Yeah. I don't think it's a bad company. I think it's nobody's priority to deal with their stupid podcaster questions.
Fair enough. And how are those affiliate revenue checks?
Yeah, well, what we talked about, we're happy to actually share sort of what we make overall from the show. And so right now, and actually last year and this year, it's going to be about the same. But between our Patreon, our meet and greets that we've done, and basically all of our revenue sources, which are Patreon, our meet and greets, and really the STI testing, website, we make about $25,000 in revenue, and then expenses on top of that probably cut a chunk of that out, especially when we were traveling a lot. So yeah,
sure, 25,000 in revenue. That's great. And what is the breakdown? What percentage of that is Patreon versus the meet and greets? And
yeah, Patreon is a little over $1,000 a month, so it's almost like half Patreon, half everything else.
Yeah.
And the other stuff is kind of variable, like the STI testing.
Varies.
Some months it'll be like $1,000 or $1,200 a month, and some months it'll be like $450 a month. And so
that's actually really amazing. That I have always been a little bit skeptical about affiliate marketing on podcasts too, because there's so much, that the fan has to remember what to type in. Do you use like an affiliate code? Is that how they're tracking it?
It's nice. All they have to do is click a link, and it does everything. So we've tried the other methods where we get like a discount code, and they're like, we have another service that it's a condom company, and they are amazing. We love them. They send us more free condoms than we could ever use in our whole lives. Like we get, we've got a lot of condoms, and we have an affiliate code for them. We've never made a penny off of it. And people say they use it. It just, we don't know what's going on. But we were like we kind of gave up on it, because we're like, you're going to make $1 off of a sale. Not that there's anything wrong with $1, but like, we know we're not selling that many condoms that we're going to like miss out on a huge chunk. So we're like,
the STI testing is just a link. And
it's a link, and better. It's the ROI, and it's good.
I see. So. And it's a link in your show notes. Is that where you put it?
Yep. And on our website.
Yeah. Show notes, website. Yeah.
Got it. That's cool. So very impressive number. You said pre-COVID, you were at about 5,000 downloads in the first month per episode. I mean, how did you even get there? It sounds like you got there in about a year, if my math is correct.
About a year and a half.
Yeah.
What was the main growth hack to get there? Because a lot of... quite honestly, so many podcasters they would envy those numbers.
I think a big thing that we had going for us is the consistency. We have been consistent every single Wednesday for over 4 years now. And I have to attribute that to Finn, because it takes both of us. And I think that has helped us. And just we were pretty relentless, especially the first year. And we continue to do this now, but reaching out to other podcasters, other content creators, trying to get our name out there, trying to go on other shows, having them come on our podcast. And I think that helped us. That helped the momentum grow quicker.
Yeah. Was there ever a time in the stats where you're like, wow, something we're really doing really is shooting up these numbers? Like, was it guesting on other podcasts or?
I think guesting on other shows has a huge impact. If you can get mentioned, like I'll periodically go and check our backlinks. Like if you use Ahrefs or something like that to do backlink checking. We've been like mentioned in like Dan Savage's like love letter of the day, or his like opinion column in like The Stranger or online. He's mentioned us on his show. We've been mentioned on some other big shows. We've been mentioned in like Cosmo articles. So we'll see like a spike from those. And I imagine there's some residual effect on that. But I think a lot of it is, like Emma said, like reaching out to other podcasters, having them on our show, and then they promote it, and then going on their show, and then they promote that. So a lot of that sort of collaboration has, I think, helped. And
we've also tried We've also tried, so we have our regularly scheduled, I guess, Wednesday interview every week, but we've tried to do a few different types of podcasts too. So we have something that we call Focus Fridays, where we've done Friday episodes where they're focused on a specific topic rather than someone's story. And that has allowed us to bring on some other guests that may not want to talk about their personal non-monogamous journey, but they have something else they want to share. So we've had people talk about shame. We've had people talk about STIs. We've had people talk about communication in relationships. And so we've also done some of those. I think we've had maybe, I don't know, are we at like 16 or 18 of those episodes? So they've been a lot more sporadic. We don't have it nearly as many, but that is something else that we've done too, to try to like
add, we want to bring more as much value as we can and education.
Right. That's smart. And those episodes are in the main podcast feed too, as bonus episodes.
As Emma was talking, I was thinking of just another kind of thing that happens for us. And it's so hard to quantify. And that is, we have a lot of guests who have a pretty big network themselves. They might have 3 or 4 partners, and each one of those partners has 2 or 3 partners. And so each person almost has this web of 10 to 20 people that they're fairly intimately related to or connected to. And then a lot of those will also maybe be in a Facebook support group or they go to like a local meetup and there's 30 or 40 people there, or they're in there's some of these Facebook groups have like 13,000 people in them. And they'll go in and say like, I was just on this really cool episode, and they'll post it. And they're just average people. They don't have a podcast. They're not famous in any way. It's just somebody who is like, I want to share my story. And then they want all their people to hear their story. And so it kind of promotes itself in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's probably a huge phenomenon that's probably happening. It's almost a perfect word of mouth podcast, because when you're normalizing something, you're explaining it to an audience that may never have been exposed to it before. And sharing that podcast is like a quick explanation. Go listen to this podcast to learn about, this thing that I'm into. And usually a bunch of friends are probably curious about what that person is into.
Yeah.
And it's a great primer to quickly introduce people to it.
We have a lot of people who tell us that they take the link for their episode and they'll put it in their dating profile. And they'll say like, hey, if you want to know about me, go listen to this. And only reach out if this resonates with you. So like we have links to our podcast in like probably 50 different like online dating profiles across the world. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Ahrefs is telling you, a lot of your traffic is coming from Tinder and
right.
Okay, Cupid. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I just listened to one of your episodes and one of your guests said exactly that. They only date people who have experience with non-monogamy. And I imagine your podcast helps spread what they're doing. So are there any other podcast growth hacks that you're experimenting with, or maybe things that didn't go right?
There's a couple of things that I wish we had done sooner. And one of those, probably the biggest one, is in April, I went through like the podcast hosting service we use. It will allow us to create a YouTube video that's basically just a static image with like a little waveform and then the episode. So I went through all 250 episodes, downloaded all of the videos, and then manually uploaded them all to YouTube and basically built a YouTube channel with 250 some episodes on it. Wow. And I was never really expecting anyone to listen on YouTube. And like looking at it right now, the average duration of view is 7.5 minutes, and our episodes are usually an hour and a half long.
So people are clearly not listening.
They're not listening to the whole episode. But the number that to me is important is our impressions, which if people are listening know what an impression is, it's basically the amount of times that somebody has seen that our thumbnail has like scrolled by their eyeballs. And in the last 2 months, we've got 175,000 impressions. And so that's 175,000 times somebody has seen our podcast that they had not seen it.
Potentially. Not seen it before. Yeah.
And 9,000 views. So we because YouTube is basically just a giant Google search engine. And so it's really just another way for people to find us that we really weren't utilizing. And I wish we had been.
That is surprising numbers because, you're right. Everyone says YouTube is like the second most used search engine in the world. Totally makes sense. But what I was always a little skeptical of is, there's a lot of these podcast hosts with like a one-click push to YouTube thing that gives you like a long audiogram. And I always thought it didn't work too. But to your point, you're getting impressions. People aren't sticking around for the full episode. Are you getting subscribers from that too?
Yeah, I can tell you that we have about we have exactly 126 subscribers. And there are some people who listen to the full episode, and for sure. And I mean, some of them have 700 downloads. One of them has 4,200 downloads, which that actually brings up another point of things that we didn't do right, but I also would argue that we did do right. And it's this thing that we've been battling for so long, which is keyword optimization. So our episodes are named after the person who is on them. It's literally just their name.
That'd be like episode 162, Sarah. Like that's all it is.
And so we did that very intentionally because we didn't want to like describe somebody in a way that really wasn't them. We wanted their story to be who they are, not what we could stuff into a character.
We didn't want to say this episode about woman who is married to a man and has a partner. Like with those, we would be like describing these people that we using terms we aren't comfortable doing.
Right. But the catch there is you're leaving a lot of SEO on the search engine optimization on the table. And so our highest viewed video on YouTube by a factor of 4, actually by a factor of 6, is an episode with 2 women who have a podcast that is called The 2 Hot Wives. And hot wife or hot wives is a very, very highly searched term. And because they had a podcast called this, it's in the name of the episode. And it is by far the most downloaded on our YouTube channel. So leaving the keywords out, I know has definitely made it harder to find us, but it was a decision we made early on to sort of just keep it about the person, not about trying to label them in a way that could increase our downloads.
So with these results, are you pivoting your decision to include more details in the title?
No,
we've decided that it has worked this long. And could we maybe get some more growth? We could. And there's been, I think, a lot of times along the way where we've decided to do something in what we felt was a better way that we knew maybe wouldn't result in fast growth. But our growth has been like very reliable and people stick around. There's not a lot of attrition. There's not people coming in and then jumping ship. We've tried to be consistent. And
we really try to build our podcast and lead with the values that are important to us and things that are important to us and the way we feel things, the way we want to do things. And we have seen that has drawn a certain incredible group of people to be in our community. And so I think we've done that right, I guess, in a lot of ways. We may not have grown as fast as we could, but the people that we've gathered and brought together are such an incredible group of people that I feel like I wouldn't change that even if we could have had more downloads or could have grown. I feel like we've done it true to ourselves, and that's the most important thing to me.
Yeah. And there's another piece in there that we've learned over the years, which is, you might have 2 episodes and it's Bob and Jane, or it could be 2 people named Bob, and they have wildly different stories, wildly different everything. But somebody who is nothing like either of these people is going to get something out of that conversation. And so we've really tried to say, like, we give people a description so they can read about it. But we've heard from so many people that say, like, I didn't think I was going to relate to this person at all because they're nothing like me. And then they're like, but man, I learned so much. I took so much away. Or it was so relatable. And so because it's a person, we're just sort of saying, like, listen to this person and relate to this person. And that's not about if they do it exactly like you or they're exactly like you. And so we've sort of been okay taking that layer away.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. Are there any other growth hacks that you wanted to share or anything that worked or maybe didn't work?
I don't have a ton. I mean, I think the growth has been important for us. And I'm that type of person who wants to see growth, but I also have had to like be okay. Like, hey, it's consistent and people are giving us good feedback. And I think we started changing the metrics by which we measured ourselves from like downloads to maybe community growth or impact on the community rather than like, because our numbers have stayed flat really on the downloads, but the community keeps growing. And so that to us tells us we're doing it the way that we want to do it. And I'm sure if we could triple our downloads, we would probably see a pretty significant growth in other places. So we're definitely wanting to do that, but in sort of a organic and measured way without sacrificing our core beliefs, which is a challenge sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Well, that's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing your numbers. This is a super useful episode. And usually we end our episodes with what I call the final 5 quick fire questions. And these are just kind of meant to be a little bit more quick and fun. And so question number 1, do you collect listener emails?
We have a mailing list. And so people can sign up for a mailing list on our website. But yes.
Yeah, if people opt in.
If people opt in.
Did you mean their email addresses or like the emails they send us?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, their email addresses. Yeah. So what are they opting into? Like a newsletter? Or?
It's once every 2 weeks, we might send them an update about something. If we'll
send them like if we're doing an event or if something's going on that we want people to know about, we'll share it.
Yeah.
Got it. Cool. Question number 2, what's the one podcast that you actually recommend the most besides your own?
Ooh.
I can go first if you want.
Oh, yeah. Go for it.
My favorite right now, there's a couple. Simon Sinek has a podcast called A Bit of Optimism, and it is amazing. Seth Godin has a podcast called Akimbo, which is amazing. And I also listen to a lot of Tim Ferriss. So, yeah.
I took that question very differently. I took it as what do we recommend most on our podcast? But maybe that's like not on our podcast, because if that's the case, the one that gets mentioned by far the most is Dan Savage, the Savage Lovecast. So that one, we recommend that one all the time and always comes up in conversations. And it's what I listen to too. So.
Yeah. Because not every podcast that we all love, we find ourselves recommending, but I find the ones that people actually recommend is pretty special.
Yeah, Finn's list are awesome too. So there's nothing against any of those. I love those podcasts as well.
Yeah, those are great. I listened to a couple of those too. I didn't know Simon Sinek had a podcast. Now I'll go check it out.
Yeah.
Question 3, how much time do you spend on your podcast a week?
Depends on the week, but a significant amount.
Yeah, I would say if we average it out, each episode, like just the core things that need to happen to make an episode happen is probably about 8 hours. 8 to 10 hours. And then it's between the community and emails and all the other stuff. Combined between us, it's probably 30 to 40 hours a week.
Wow, 30 to 40. That's quite...
With the two of us.
Between the
combined.
Two of us,
Right, right. Wow, that's awesome. That's quite a bit of work. Question 4, what's your favorite podcast tool?
I can go first again if you want.
I was just going to say Patreon because of how it's helped us build the community. Yeah. So do you have something else?
Yeah, I have 2. One is, so I do a lot more of the editing. And so I have a few more of like the technical things that have made my life amazing. So one, there's a plugin for GarageBand, which I still just edit in GarageBand, but there's a plugin that will do audio denoise, like white noise cancellation or background noise cancellation. That has been a lifesaver. There's also a website.
What's it called?
Oh, geez.
I try to usually put all these links in the show notes.
Yeah, it is. It was called Crumple Pop.
Crumple Pop. Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the organization, but it's like Crumple Pop Audio Denoise or something like that.
Okay, for GarageBand. Useful.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then there's a website called Ophonic, and that's AUPHONIC. And when you upload your file there, it'll automatically level out. So if maybe our guest is quiet and we're loud, so it'll bring those levels. It can do some of the white noise or background noise cancellation. And it also brings your overall audio up to, there's a measurement, a LUF, which is a measurement of loudness. And this brings it up to the industry standard of loudness for a podcast. And so I used to worry about all of that as I was like editing, and now I can just like focus on the content, get to the end, upload it, it spits out, and it's awesome. So
yeah, love tools that make our life easier. That's awesome. Good recommendations. Final question. What's your primary call to action at the end of each of your episodes?
most of the time. It is go find our Patreon community on our website and go check out stdcheck.com.
What was the last one? Go check out what?
stdcheck.com. That's the STI
the
testing
affiliate.
website. Yep. So those are our go-to things at the end of every episode.
That's cool. Well, there you have it, folks. Thanks so much, Emma and Finn, for sharing all your podcast growth hacks. And if you like what you heard, go check out normalizingnonmonogamy.com. That's the name of the podcast and the name of the website where you could go find their Patreon, join it, very affordable, and go click some affiliate links.
That's right. Yeah, we appreciate it. Thanks, Pat, for having us on.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a great conversation.
Thanks for listening to Podcast Growth Hacks. If you like the show, please tell a fellow podcaster about it. This really does help keep our show going. And if you have a podcast growth question that you're kind of curious about, well, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave me an audio message by going to podinbox.com/podcast. Once again, that's podinbox.com/podcast. I'll include that link in my show notes. I personally respond to all questions I receive there. And once I get your question, I'll find the podcasting expert to answer it on an upcoming episode. We'll play your question and I'll even give you a shout out. Until the next episode, keep creating and keep growing your show.
And we're back. Thank you, Pat, for interviewing us on your podcast and for letting us release this episode on our show as well. We love talking with you and having the conversation, and just thank you again for all of the work that you do as well.
Yeah, a huge amount of gratitude, Pat. It was a pleasure to meet you in Portland, Oregon.
Anyway, a few quick announcements, and then we promise we'll let you go. Please go to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com. There you can sign up for the upcoming virtual meet and greet, which is Tuesday, September 27th, coming up very soon. And we'd love to have you join us. These are open to anyone. You just must be respectful, open-minded, and the price is pay what you want. We also have shirts for sale on our website, Give Love shirts and sweatshirts. Go check them out. Purchase one of your own. We think they're super cool, and we're really excited about them. If you can't tell, because we talk about them all the time.
Yeah, it's getting cold out there. You need a hoodie.
Right.
Right.
And a quick reminder that links to all of the work that Pat does are in the show notes. Go check out everything.
normalizingnonmonogamy.com. Click on the podcast tab or the about tab or the contact tab or any of the tabs.
It's all there.
Every tab is just an amazing place to be. And next week, we have an interview with Eka, Eka from Portugal. It's a beautiful conversation. We hope to see you on Wednesday. Thank you, everybody. Actually, we hope to see you on Tuesday.
For the meet and greet first.
All right.
And then the episode on Wednesday.
All right. Well, have an amazing weekend.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.